می‌رسیم.
اگه اجازه بدید من خیلی ممنون همگی که اومدین. خیلی خوشبختم از آشناییتون. به انگلیسی میخونم ولی بعدش میتونم قبل از اینکه Q&A رو شروع کنیم بعد خلاصه رو به فارسی هم میگم. So the title of my presentation is Bothered, the Sacred and Countered the Canonized in the Iranian Theatre of War. In a frosty evening in winter 1995, the cast and audience of the Whispers Behind the Front Line, Peshpechahani Pashta Khat Nabard, at Moosavi Theatre in Tehran, were shocked to find themselves in the middle of another heated show. While they were watching a play about the tragic final moments of a group of ordinary traumatized soldiers set on an Iranian war front, a horde of angry religious fanatics stormed into the auditorium, interrupted the performance, pushed the actors off the stage, and started saying prayers to cleanse the space of what they believed was a performance disrespectful to veterans and martyrs of the sacred defense. Alireza Naderi's highly acclaimed anti-war play, The Whispers Behind the Front Line, I would call it The Whispers from now on, written in 1993 and staged in 1995, is described by many as the most critical and truthful play about the Iran-Iraq War. The play's linear structure and three scenes set on the front line present a realistic depiction of two uneventful nights of 6 soldiers' lives during a temporary ceasefire in the summer 1982. Most of the dramatic narrative hinges on a series of heated debates on issues concerning war strategies, politics, and religion. 4 years after the night of rampage that attacked by religious zealots, during the reformist era, surprisingly, the Whispers did obtain a license for public performance and returned to Moosavi Hall and the City Theatre complex. Box office sales reportedly skyrocketed night after night. Since then, the play has been revived 4 more times in 2012, 2016, and 2017. This time by 2 young directors, Mohammad Reza Satari and Ashkan Khailnejad, who, although belonging to the new generation of artists, seemed to understand Naderi's whispers and also the real urgency of reviving them, albeit differently and in accordance to their own vision and ethical commitment. In today's presentation, I identified the interventionist themes and aesthetics dramatized in the Whispers by initially contrasting it against the state-promoted ethos and narrative of war showcased in Kanal Komel Canal as a theater promoting values of sacred defense, Defai Muqaddas. I'll show that while the embodied emotions and mentality of the Vaziri type character are sacralized and eternalized in the theater of sacred defense, it is desacralized and even bothered or othered in the anti-war plays. Then, by tracing the shift in the ethical and aesthetic vision of 3 directors of the Whispers, I demonstrate that their ethical responses are converted to different aesthetic choices, resulting in an alternative theatrical interventionism. Iranian artists, including Naderi, define interventionist theater as a theater that, quote, dramatizes pain, speaks for others who cannot speak, brings awareness and seeks truth, unquote. Naderi describes his playwriting practice as a perpetual encounter, as he notes, quote, in this play, I'm concerned with both form and structure, and also with censorship and writing the war taboos, unquote. As a war veteran, Naderi's chief aim in writing about war is to, quote, dramatize an alternative history of war for the future generation, unquote. And in his vision, this history must be as truthful and believable as possible. In my examination of Iranian interventionist theater of war, I must not ignore the mutually constitutive relationship between this theater and the dominant systems of control, state power, religion, and norms of the community, ORF. To take a Foucauldian approach, indeed the anti-war interventionist theater is an apt example of theatrical counterconduct that is created in response to the religio-political context of Iran and the shared issues of Iranians. And while observing stage regulations, these plays can intervene through a counter-hegemonic network of stories, characters, reasoning, emotions, and values. But what is sacred defense theater and its subgenre of arzeshi theater, تئاتر ارزشی? I'm sure you are all familiar with تئاتر دفاع مقدس, or the values of دفاع مقدس, which is the sacred defense is a term coined by the Iranian state in reference to the 8-year war with Iran and Iraq, 1982-1988. This concept and its dictates have acutely impacted any cultural product and aims to commemorate, narrate, or theatricalize this war. The fundamental values and concepts in the discourse and practice of sacred defense culture are martyrdom, shahadat, spiritual perfection, kamal ma'navi, absolute trust in God's will, tawakkul, and the practice of contented self, nafs mutma'inne, as opposed to nafs ammare, or even inciting itself, and their emotional and embodied registers. During the 1980s, many committed and Vaziri artists who considered martyrs as their invisible audiences and to reinforce the Perso-Islamic norms of community and national values began to envisage a sort of sublime or fakir aesthetics for their theater making under the agenda of sacred defense culture. They drew inspiration from Naqali and Tazieh, war memories, folkloric epic of heroism, interpretations of religious texts, and Quranic verses. The result has been the emergence of a distinct school of theater making called تئاتر ارزشی, literally translating theater of values. A direct outcome of this value system was a quintessential figure known as Vaziri also. Literally self-mobilized forces that are distinguishable by their unshakable faith in God and the values of the revolution and their sincere practice of altruism, piety, modesty, fighting the enemies of Islam, and being prepared for sacrifice and martyrdom. Most Vaziri characters in the theater of sacred defense in this genre, also the Arzeshi theater, are allegorical figures, each symbolizing positive virtues and norms of the community. As you see, look at the color symbolism, the flag, the dove. So these symbols are recurrent in the theater of sacred defense or Arzeshi theater. So yeah, there's some sort of bold symbolism in it. Now let's examine one of the plays from the recent repertoire of theater of values. Kanal Komail, or Komail Canal, is a play situated in between semi-documentary and non-realistic theatricalization of a military operation during which almost all the battalion were killed or were missing by military attack or thirst. The dramatic action weaves forward and back in time through memory flashbacks of a group, Group Tafahos, who tried to recover the missing bodies in Komail Canal, which exists in current Iraq, I guess, or yeah, it used to be in Iraq. In the course of their search, a messenger sent by the martyred bodies reveals that Khomeini martyrs are living an eternal life and they do not want to be recovered. The main theme of Khomeini Canal is, this is another, yeah, this is Khomeini Canal. The main theme is pitched toward the idealization of the concepts of necropolitics and the much promoted slogan of martyrs are always alive. So the preservation of their physical bodies does not matter. Moreover, death and suffering from thirst has a highly religious and emotional significance for Shia believers and their collective memory of the Karbala event about Imam Hussein. Here also the canal's aggrandized big presence on the stage is the central allegory of the play, because it signifies the mightiness of the heavenly life the Khomeini bodies are living after being martyred. The bodies of the missing bodies is mixed with the canal as an unlisted character, and it becomes spiritualized and eternalized as a unified, glorious embodiment of all these missing soldiers. Moreover, throughout the play, Basiji soldiers have dialogue with their God through Du'ai Khomeini, supplication of Khomeini, and you see the perpetual presence of God. In a final scene, a strong beam of green light suggests martyrs' transcendence to the exalted position that the Khomeini bodies have achieved. that is the reunion with God. The play's message is that the greatest battle for Khomeini's has been defeating their nafs ammara, evidence-citing self, and not fighting against Iraqis and their ultimate gratification, therefore, is gained by their success in reaching the state of spiritual perfection. But today I want to show that the Theatre of Sacred Defense is not the only theatrical rendition of the truth of Iran-Iraq war. In the post-war era, Iranian political consciousness has experienced a series of ideological schism and reformist tendencies, which led to the disenchantment and fatigue, some sort of tiredness with the ideals of values of revolution and sacred defense. The playwright Alireza Naderi, born in 1961, the author of The Whispers Behind the Front Line, was among those dissident intellectuals who wrote in such circumstances, and as I told you, he felt committed to rewrite the history of Iran-Iraq war. The play, as I told, is a realistic depiction of final hours of life of 6 soldiers at Iran-Iraq war frontline. As the scenes unfold, soldiers talk about various topics: Iraqi air attacks, the military circumstances, how one of the soldiers, Dost Ali, is mimicking a French kiss while sleeping, and more importantly, a mysterious case of someone throwing a stone at a tank parked nearby. Through long, passionate, even argumentative exchanges, we learn about the soldiers' mindset and feelings regarding fighting with Iraqis. Naderi uses a bitter yet humorous tone to reveal that what promoted these soldiers to come to the front line was not a desire to achieve religious virtue or spiritual perfection or martyrdom, but rather their nationalist, patriotic values and passion for life. As a war veteran, who was a soldier himself, Naderi draws on his alternative personal history and acknowledges and loads his play with strong references to societal and cultural life of Iranians and portrays lifelike and credible characters coming from different walks of life. Their accents, Mashhadi accent, Yazdi accent, Tehrani accent, and their religious, Muslim, Jews, they show the extent that playwright tends to portray the multiplicity of attitudes and realities that were involved in the Iran-Iraq war. The best character description is offered by Alireza, the protagonist of the play that is offered by Alireza. He describes his comrades as, "Our Bagher is a good body. He always coughs up bits of unchewed, repeated ideas, but Shahryar is a scientist, Dustali is a mystic, Yusuf is lovely, Parviz is a crappy guy, and me, this is what I am, Alireza, Khuzestan." So you see that this is totally different from what we know as a typical Vaziri. Naderi creates multi-dimensional characters that undergo emotional and intellectual change. They trim their hair, bicker, play games, smoke, and even enjoy gossiping and mimicking each other. They live their quotidian, monotonous trench life at the front line. One of the soldiers, Parviz, for instance, is an opportunist for whom the end justifies the means. Battle fatigue, personal catastrophe, doubt, and disbelief to politicize religion and interpersonal conflicts are defining traits for these soldiers. Obviously, none of these features bear virtues ascribed to Basijis and their contented self, such as epic-like bravery, trust in God, sincerity, khulus, and spiritual certainty, yaqeen. Additionally, the multi-dimensional characters, their vernacular language, and casual costumes are aesthetically supported by Naderi's photographic representation of a war front on the stage through realistic stage design and lighting. According to Masoud Riazi, who is I'm honored that is present today. I feel so lucky that I found the stage designer of the show here in Toronto, in Canada. So Mr. Riazi told me they perform about the stage design, which is very realistic and photographic. The main stage props were a trench, an ammunition box, a water tank, a plastic ewer, and a radio. To reinforce the realistic effect, recorded sounds were used minimally. Instead, For instance, there was real water purling, and the sound of stone throwing was created by the actual act of throwing stones onto steel objects on the stage. Unquote. All these props, particularly the plastic ewer of Tabe, give a vivid image of fighters' lives at war. In an even sharper contrast with the Arzeshi theater that is full of white doves, red tulips, and green symbols of spiritual transcendence, here the playwright literally employs animal metaphors: horsefly, fox, hens, roosters, tiger, etc. In addition to creating multidimensional counter-Vaziri characters, he also creates multifaceted nature of their feelings and emotional responses. So I'm going to now talk about the emotionality that is represented in Peshpechai Pasht Khat Nabard. Disillusionment and discontent with the outcome of the war are apparent through the shift emotionality has taken in the Iranian theater of war. We can identify this shift from nationalistic pride, high moral, and love of God and afterlife in the Arzeshi theater to the feeling of fear, pain, and shame in the anti-war play. In the Whispers, Naderi animated his characters by having them show a variety of feelings typical of ordinary mortal people at the time of trauma, anguish, physical pain that are totally detached from the mystical or theosophical forces we see in a theater of sacred defense. In the opening scene, Parviz sings Feridun Furugi's The Ankle, Muzakepa, which is a pre-revolutionary popular hit about the despair and frustration of failure in love, particularly in earthly love. The song's pessimistic and sorrowful tone is in sharp contrast with what we hear at the beginning of Komail Canal, where the echoes of Komail's supplication, Du'ai Komail, are played. To Ali Reza, the strange situation is a hell and death. The promise of victory to him is a castle in the air. And as he says bitterly to Dustali, quote, "We're supposed to play the role of conquerors across the border," unquote. The embodied aftermath in the Arzeshi theater exhibits wounded bodies as purified vessels. Violence is purified in the theater of sacred defense, and the bodies are purified for connecting to God. In the Whispers, strikingly, we encounter the most morally shocking image of a distorted corporeality and disturbed mentality in Iranian repertoire of war theater. In the third scene of the play, the audience encounters Ali Reza's loss of coordination, doubled with his anxiety and panic attack as a result of the hashish he smoked the night before the military alert. Under the influence of the drug, Ali Reza reveals his internal conflict, doubts, and intimate thoughts and memories. In some, we see that the play's counter-Arzeshi emotionality is manifested in the dramatization of the multiplicity of emotion, not only one emotion, as well as it shows the spiritual disintegration of soldiers at the time of war. This is another image of the Whispers directed by Naderi himself. Next part is dialectical representation of war in the Whispers. Most of what the Whispers has to offer, especially in relation to the issues of Iran-Iraq war and Iranian identity, is the technique of dialectical representation, presented through a series of reasonable debates and conducted by sensible individuals whose emotionality and religious faith are controlled and curtailed by their rationality. The characters vigorously negotiate political issues such as Israeli-Palestinian conflict, communist doctrinal practice, the emergence of the bourgeois class, and its unethical interdependence with war-mongering incentives, the revolutionary ideals, and most importantly, the distinction between the truth and reality of religion. In addition to such explicit criticism, Naderi's dramaturgical choice of simply ignoring the canonized narrative and values of sacred defense, such as martyrdom, can be considered another instance of theatrical counterconduct or interventionism. In the following conversation that reveal how pro-monarchists chastise the Basiji's agenda, Bagher and Dusali articulate their critical opinion while mimicking pro-monarchists and general in a humorous tone. So this is the dialogue between Bagher and Dusali, the two soldiers. Dusali, while mimicking, such foolish boys. No wise person goes on the mine, says so the general. Bagher also mimicking, war requires tactic. For example, what is this brazier? Dustali laughing. Khorramshahr, Bagher still mimicking. Well, they must surround it. It has no sense to say Allahu Akbar, God is great, and go ahead just like a flock of sheep. Starts coughing. Such foolish boys. Dustali sadly, they call us foolish boys. So as you might have noticed, they're actually articulating this in a mimicking voice, and because if they wanted to do that, they would be censored. So they're actually mimicking the monarchists saying these words. And they use humorous tone. This is one of the moments of encounter, or ruyarui and confrontation, muwajahe, that Naderi wanted to create in his non-spiritualized practice of realism. As the Iranian theater critic Ahmad Talebinejad also notes, arranging the set and actors in double mise-en-scène, crowding the stage with multiple props and employing dovetailing dialogues, amplify the potential for realistic dialogical and dialectical representation about taboo ideas, while staying safe from the state censorship and moral audiences discontent. Should I continue? Okay.
Sure. You want me to start?
No, I can continue. I want to talk about the humorous and playfulness of the character of Ali Reza that is very similar to the character of Sia in Ruhozi or Siawazi plays. The playful character of Ali Reza and his counter Basiji traits feature another interventionist case of theatrical counterconduct. He's the master of trickery, physical agility, role-playing, mimicking and outfitting other characters and impersonating various personalities, once a mullah, then his own father, and later their own lieutenant. In some instances, Al-Reza's humor and light-hearted mockery resemble the humorous character of Sia, blackface, in traditional comic improvisatory performances known as Ruhozi. Sia's subtle and charming witticism enables him to play around with norms and moral values. As a prototype for the character of Ali Reza, Sia can reveal some ideas that no one else dares to mention. His playfulness allows the audience to imagine the impossible ideas on the stage. This carnivalesque atmosphere, however, turns to a tragedy when all soldiers except the opportunist Parviz are killed at the end of the play. But even until the very last moment, Ali Reza maintains his sense of humor by telling a long joke. As Ashkan Khalilnejad, one of the directors of the play in 2017 and 2012 also concludes, comedy contains more rationality than tragedy. And Al-Reza's wit intertwined with the soldiers' intellectual debate reinforced this defamiliarization. To conclude for this section, what makes Naderi's dramaturgy and directorial choices interventionist are multivocality in characterization, viewpoints, and emotions, creating multidimensional, relatable characters, connecting his microcosm of the front line to the inner lives of his characters in a realistic way, engaging his audience emotionally as well as intellectually through dialogical interactions, and bringing relevant critical references to historical and political events by means of dialectical representation, and also using satire and mockery. These are all the techniques that Naderi used to challenge the canonized version of sacred defense. This network of theatrical counterconduct leads to reinventing new identities. We have, you could say, counter Basiji characters and also counter Arzashi narrative of Iran-Iraq war that are offering an alternative reality of the war. So this brings me to the final part of my presentation, which is about how the Whispers, has been revived in recent years by the new group of Iranian directors. Indeed, the critical whispers about the Iran-Iraq war never end. They remain in the minds of the new generation of Iranian theater practitioners, continuing to ask why, for many questions. For example, why the war did not end earlier. Ashkan Khailnejad in 2012 and 2017, and Mohammad Reza Satari in 2016 and again 2017, addressed this question in their revivals of the play that were staged in both state-owned and privately owned venues. So interestingly, in 2017 that I went to Iran, both of them were staging the show. Like me, both directors belong to the post-war generation of the artists. And they are in their 30s, did not have a direct contact or experience of the Iran-Iraq war, but they both feel the threat of another war with the US or Israel, and they also view the risk of war as a global catastrophic phenomenon. In terms of directorial practice, however, the biggest difference between Naderi's choices and those of Satari and Khailnejad lies in their stage design and prop selection. Khailnejad follows Naderi's realistic approach, but limits his choices of prop to a few sacks of sand, a bucket, and an ammunition box. What differentiates his stage design from Naderi's is the emptiness of his dark stage. The quasi-abstract, empty, and dark space allows Khailnejad to theatricalize a fresh perspective on the universal truth about the absurdities and evil consequences of war, while reminding his audience about the recent trauma that his nation has gone through. In comparison, Satari's directorial practice involves little attempt to present a photographic image of war on the stage. His minimal, emblematic approach to the play requires only two significant elements: about 20 colored coded tires and a red backdrop. To Satari, tires signify motion and mobility, but worn-out tires convey immobility and deadness. The absolute outcome of any war is this deadness that is shown in the red marks as you see here. The red tires are placed on the Iraqi side, representing the dead, and the yellow marked tires signify the premonition of danger on the Iranian side, reminding Iranians that getting involved in any war would cost them a lot. In contrast to the lifelike wall of Homer Canal, which has the spiritual and allegorical function of transferring the idea of sacredness on the stage, designed by Satari, the large-scale perforated backdrop simply signifies the breach between the separation between life and death, and offers no celestial or elevated pathway to afterlife and God's heaven. To both young directors, war does not address a particular nation's security and ideology. Thus, as a global phenomenon, it does not pertain to a specific geography or temporality. Out of universality comes temporal and spatial simultaneity. This explains why the new generation of directors of war plays has shaped a global ethical vision that entails getting away from the catastrophe of the Iran-Iraq war and its spatio-temporal as well as religio-political specificity, while employing a kind of objective universalism. As revealed by the testimonies of many theater critics and experts, Naderi's ethic of continual criticism and rewriting of history was so phenomenal that his whispers influenced the periodization of the Iranian theater of war, dividing it into two phases: pre-whispers and post-whispers. As Aghay Riazi told me, پیش از پچ‌پچه‌ها و پس از پچ‌پچه‌ها. So Iranian theater about war is really categorized پیش از پچ‌پچه‌ها and پس از پچ‌پچه‌ها.